What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 4 of the DRS Podcast, your pit stop for Formula One. We're here to talk to you today about the Belgian Grand Prix and the Dutch Grand Prix. Obviously, everyone knows here that the Belgian Grand Prix wasn't much of a Grand Prix, but we were definitely rewarded by the Dutch Grand Prix, which was one of the best shows I think Formula One's put on in a long while. I'm here with my brother, Jonathan Yeagerman, and we are here to talk to you, and we're super excited about it.
Right, and as you'll notice, this time we don't have our usual setup, and that's because my brother Sean went off to school in Boston, so he's ditched me. But we're going to deal with that, and we have to still put out some content, so we're going to do it on Zoom instead. All right, so we're going to get into the Belgian Grand Prix. So basically, we're just going to sum up quali, really, because that's what was most important, and that's really what decided the end result of the race. So the first thing that I want to say about the Belgian Grand Prix is that Tsunoda again had a rough Q1. Very disappointing, not putting in the results, and we saw that again this past weekend. But Tsunoda had a bad time. And then again, both Williams into Q2 and George Russell into Q3.
Impressive as ever, huh?
Yeah, impressive as ever, putting it on the front row, which was, I think, a moment for everyone where it's like, why is he not in the Mercedes car right now?
Right.
When you out-qualify Lewis Hamilton.
I know we're going to talk about this later, but I guess it's worth saying that, right, we're recording here on Tuesday morning, and about an hour ago, George announced that he will be driving for Mercedes in 2022.
Yes.
So it goes to show that his work was definitely rewarded. On the other hand, though, we just spoke about Yuki, who's had a shaky season, and he was just announced also to come back for AlphaTauri in 2022 as well. The first time, I think, since 2012, 2013 that team has had the same lineup for 2 years in a row, with Pierre staying. So I guess it goes to show that there is a level of confidence for those two guys. But let's head back to the race.
All right. So just Russell P2, Max on pole, Hamilton P3, solid qualifying session. It was quite exciting. Obviously, Lando had his massive shunt in the wall in Q3, which I think was pretty scary for us all.
Yeah, everyone holds their breath, I think, when that happens in Spa and Eau Rouge and Ready on the big swooping corners up the hill. We've had horrible accidents there in the past few years, even this year, I think, in various racing series. So it just goes to show that, I think the F1 fans have called for a little bit of change there. And I think Formula One has said they've agreed to altering, I think, the barriers to make them, I guess less harsh when hitting them.
Absolutely. And I also think that, after we've seen all these incidents and people get seriously hurt, and 2 years ago, sadly, Antoine Hubert passed away due to an incident there, we know that we have to make changes. They know that they have to make changes. Changes will come. I know they have to make some next year for some motorcycle racing that they're going to be hosting. So I hope that also benefits the safety for Formula One as well.
Let's head on to Sunday, which wasn't much of anything. I think. Go ahead.
Yeah. So even to start off, we didn't get off on time with the race. So right away they were delaying the start. 5 minutes,
hours.
another 5 minutes, another 5 minutes, another 5 minutes, and then we did a lap behind the safety car, and then we came back in with 2 wet, and then we waited. And then we waited, and then we waited, and then we did another 2 laps behind the safety.
Plus 5 minutes, plus 5 minutes, plus 5 minutes.
Right. And honestly, the weather was terrible. It was pouring rain, super unsafe to drive. But as a whole, it was just a really, really big disaster. The entire race distance was 2.5 laps behind a safety car.
It really wasn't a race at all.
It wasn't a race.
It was a controlled drive behind a safety car, and it was a shame because you had fans who were there for 5 odd hours, paid big money to go see a Formula One race, and really Formula One just should have canceled it. And I think the real thing is that, again, like we've spoken about this so many times, Formula One is a business, and so much money goes into setting up these events. And when you're able to qualify it as a race and count it as a race, you technically don't need to refund your fans because they saw a race. The drivers were granted half points. So instead of the full points, they were granted half the amount, which was really just for, I guess, their qualifying lap and their qualifying pace and where they finished, because, you didn't really get points for that race. It wasn't a race.
Right. And, you can say on a day like that, it's very hard, even half points, because 2 laps behind a safety car. You don't even give people an opportunity to pass, to overtake, to race, to get a good start, to get a bad start.
Yeah.
So it was really just, these drivers doing the bare minimum to get half points. Like Pierre Gasly said, I don't understand how I can get points after a day like today where I did nothing. I sat behind the safety car for 2 laps and that was it. So, I mean, obviously people do have to get rewarded for their great quality performances. Like, George on the podium was amazing to see, but, should he really have gotten 9 points for that? Like, that's a lot.
Very tough to say.
That's a lot, and that's a lot in the championship for a team.
For a team like
now
Williams.
Is not exactly.
Yeah, it can really make them, instead of last or second to last or even third to last in the championship standings, you can finish like P7 or P8, which is pretty crazy for Williams.
Exactly.
I guess let's move on to the next weekend, which was just a few days ago in Zandvoort, the Dutch Grand Prix. What a show that was.
Yeah, just to start off, that is one hell of a track. Undulating, as the F1 broadcasters like to say. Ups and downs, banked corners that we've never really seen before in Formula One. It was a pretty incredible track, as all the drivers were saying. Very enjoyable to drive. But I guess we'll start off with the quali, because quali was going to be really the show of the weekend. Everyone knew it on that track. Low fuel, sending it. And
very fast.
Perez had a terrible qualifying.
Yeah,
Sergio
brutal.
Perez out in Q1, P16. When your teammate, as we're going to get later, too, is on pole, you can't be P16. You can't be
doesn't
P16.
Work. Really doesn't work, and it's a shame because Red Bull again has always had some trouble in the last few years finding someone who's be able to be consistent in that second seat. Sergio Perez is coming back for 2022 in the Red Bull seat, and he still hasn't really managed to match Max. And we know Max is world champion caliber. He's showing that now, but regardless, Sergio Perez is someone who's won races in Formula One, and he needs to be better. He just needs to be better.
Right. Now moving on to Williams, who had, for the first half of qualifying, it looked awesome for them.
Yeah.
They had the pace. They were doing well. Then towards the end of Q2, George was putting in a decent lap to probably send him into Q3, spun it on the second to last corner, hit the barrier. Didn't look like there was too much damage, but couldn't continue in the session. Then once the session got restarted, Nicholas Latifi, his teammate, was also putting in a solid lap, just as he had to pass Lewis in a little bit too early. His tires were on the grass, spun it, and had a big, I think it was 38G shunt into the wall.
Yeah, he bended as well. Okay. It's pretty big shunt.
Yeah, it went from 0 to 0 for Williams in that Q2 session.
And unfortunately, that killed Lando's day, because he had 2 red flags in the session, and Lando, who was off the pace. It's pretty rare to see Lando. I think it was his first time out in Q3 for the first time, I think, in 13 races. So unfortunately, he wasn't able to get another lap in due to those red flags.
Yeah, and exactly. It was the first time this whole season that Lando's been out of Q3, and for someone who's been so consistent, and now in the last race he had his crash in Q3. 2 races ago he was punted out by Valtteri, and then this weekend, starting off the weekend with a tough quali, it does take a hit on his confidence for sure. Although he knows he has such a strong base from the start of this season.
That's true.
I doubt that really will get to him too much. Okay, Stroll and Aston Martin had a rough quali. They looked pretty good in FP3. Never really turned out to have the pace.
And we'll get to that a little bit later. I think that team is really not where they thought they'd be this year, right? Yeah.
Week in, week out, they're struggling. Vettel got blocked by Mazepin and Schumacher at the end of the Q1 session, which really messed him up. But for Q2, Stroll could make it through. Lacked a bit of pace. And now into a bit of a better story, Giovinazzi into Q3. Second time this season. Yeah, second time this season since Monaco. But he really put in a flyer. Had amazing 1-lap pace, and I believe put up.
And a little bit of a surprise was that Kimi Räikkönen tested positive for COVID, and as a result, Alfa Romeo reserve driver Robert Kubica took his spot. Funny to see him back in an F1 car after a little while, but just obviously wishing Kimi the best. And Kimi, announced likewise this weekend that he will actually be leaving Formula One at the end of this year. It's been an incredible career for him, so he'll be sure to be missed on the F1 paddock.
Right, 21 race wins. That's quite a career. The most races of all time, I believe he's on 341 currently.
Yeah, most distance traveled as well in a Formula One car ever.
Yeah, most laps. It's been quite a career for Kimi. I think everyone on the grid, although few of them really do have a great friendship or relationship with him, everyone just has the utmost respect. They know he's a clean driver. He likes to fight. He can fight.
Yeah, absolutely.
He races hard, but always fair. And F1 definitely has its memes and memorable moments from him. And
he's a guy where he's safe to say he's done his talking on the track, because
exactly
doesn't talk much.
Especially not to the media.
Yeah, I guess let's move on to the race Sunday. What a day that was.
Yeah, straight off the bat, everyone knew that atmosphere was nuts before the race was starting. The flares were going. There was orange fog for the start of the race. Those fans were nuts. Everyone was saying how it was one of the best atmospheres that they'd ever seen, and the race hadn't even begun. And then
many of the reporters were talking about how on the grid before the race, you really just couldn't hear anything. They wear big headsets and everything, but
right.
Still, Will Buxton said he couldn't hear anything. Nico Rosberg, who was reporting for Sky Sports, was saying that it was just impossible to hear anything on the grid, which is, I guess, what you want in the Formula One Grand Prix. Grandstands packed. It was one hell of an atmosphere.
Right. Yeah. Everyone knows that that Spa is usually the home to all the Max Verstappen fans, all the Dutch fans. But I gotta say, I think Zandvoort outdid them. Like you said, nobody could hear a thing because it was so loud this year. And yeah, just a pretty incredible atmosphere overall. And the crowd got rewarded pretty well. Max had quite a brilliant win this weekend, I think you could say. Really
Absolutely.
Responded to everything Lewis and Mercedes
and their strategy, and they really outplayed them.
Right. Yeah. Lewis was saying the whole race behind him that Lewis basically kept until he did his final pit stop and dropped back quite a bit. He was basically 1.5 to 4.5 seconds the entire race, and Lewis said, I was going flat out qualifying lap after qualifying lap the entire race, and he just couldn't do anything else to challenge Max. There are some questions over that second pit stop that Lewis and Mercedes did, if it was a little bit too early, because Lewis ended up in traffic afterwards. But I think overall you can say that Lewis and Mercedes really did put up the best fight that they could. And just Max is driving just so incredibly well.
On another level now.
Yeah. And I think I said this to you on Sunday. When you see Max drive that well, and the team working that well, and the strategy working that well, and the Dutch fans like, wow, Max Verstappen, there's no reason why Max Verstappen shouldn't be and can't be world champion. He's 100%. Incredible. He's got the fan base, and he just week in, week out delivers and doesn't make mistakes.
Yeah, it's very impressive to see. It really is. For a guy who's still so young and so early in his Formula One career, he's done an awesome job, and I'm sure we have still a lot more to see the rest of the year.
Yeah. Pierre with quite a quiet drive, but an amazing drive.
An amazing drive nonetheless.
Yeah, it's crazy how P4 was a lap behind. He got lapped in P4.
Yeah.
Was quite an incredible drive for him. He really performed, had great pace all weekend. Obviously, he was challenged at some points by the Ferraris, but really had excellent pace there in P4, much better than Tsunoda did, who was all the way down in. Oh yeah, he retired. That's true.
He retired.
Exactly.
Yeah,
a lot went on.
It's a tough go for him, but like we said, he's been shown a vote of confidence as his seat's been renewed for 2022. Moving on though, Alpine with another very solid double points finish. Fernando really had a strong race and some nice overtakes. He's been really doing really well the last little while.
Yeah, absolutely, and everyone knows that Fernando's the lap one king this year so far. So he got a little bit of an interesting start. Nearly got collected by George Russell heading into turn 2, I believe. That would have been a disaster for George right before the series announcement. But yeah, so then he was behind, and then everyone for some reason took a low line into turn 3, and Fernando, his wise old head, just said, nope, I'm going to go around the outside of you all. And he got 2 places in turn 3, which is a great start.
A nice bank corner.
Pretty cool move.
Super cool to see.
Yeah, it was a beautiful move. Charles finishing P5 and Sainz P7 is again solid for Ferrari. Obviously, like we've said this whole season, not exactly where they want to be, but they're third in the constructors. They're 11 points, I believe, ahead of McLaren right now, who
which is
had a tough
huge, right?
weekend themselves.
They don't have McLaren or this year Aston Martin ahead of them, right? They're back up with, I guess you can say, Red Bull and Mercedes, definitely off their pace, but still much better than where they once were.
Exactly, and they'll be happy with P3 if they can get it at the end of the year. Although you can never count McLaren out, they're gonna come back strong, and they're gonna definitely challenge them for the rest of the season. Speaking of them, they did have a bit of a tougher race. Danny Rick got into Q3 and out-qualified Lando for one of the first times this season.
Yeah.
But it was Lando who finished on top, the McLaren duo coming home P10 and P11.
And moving on to people who've had a little bit of a struggle, as we spoke about earlier, Aston Martin, falling down to P7 in the championship. That is not where this team needs to be, not where they want to be. A little bit of a tough weekend.
Yeah, Lawrence Stroll will be fuming in whichever house he's sitting in currently. He's going to be a
Seb had a nice
he's
spin.
going to be in a
was it
Seb had
three?
a half spin, nearly, yeah, exactly. Turn 3. I forget what lap it was, but nearly took out Valtteri, which would have been an absolute disaster.
Would have been terrible. Would have been horrible.
Seb is a very good driver. We know that he's a 4-time world champion, but there are these little mistakes like this where you're like, what's going on? He's so good. We know he's so good. A lot of the weekends he has the pace, and then he makes small little mistakes like these where he's like, okay, is he really still at his peak form?
Yeah, no. I totally agree. And on the other hand, Lance has just been, in my opinion, too quiet this year, right? He he's a good driver, but I maybe it's the car, I don't know, but I'm expecting bigger things from him, right? I mean, yes, we know he has that drive because he's talented. At the same time, like we spoke about, he has the drive because his father also owns that team, but he's expected to do, I think, a lot stronger than he has been recently.
Right, and I think for a guy like Lance, who's always been questioned, people have always questioned his ability to drive. You can't sit around here now in your 5th year and be quiet.
No,
right. You got to put on some.
He's been on for a while.
You got to put on some super special performances, which he just hasn't really done so far yet this season.
Yeah.
He started off stronger. Had a couple points finishes when Seb was struggling, and now it's kind of flipped. And Lance has been the one out of the points, not really doing anything too exciting. And that's a trend. Same thing happened last year. With Sergio. Lance started off really, really strong, and then had like 4 or 5 really good results, and then all of a sudden just couldn't deliver anymore.
Yeah.
Moving on, though, be a confidence thing.
Yeah, it could be a confidence thing this year. But moving on, after Giovinazzi had an unreal qualifying, unfortunately, he had a little bit of a tougher race.
Yeah, he actually had a puncture, which made him stop an extra time, which put him down into P14, ahead of his teammate, who is Kubica this weekend, P15. Gio would have wanted more. Great quali, best of the year. And it was a great opportunity for them to get back some points at Williams in the championship.
Yep.
Although sadly for Gio and for Alpha, they couldn't do that this weekend.
Didn't pan out as they would have hoped. And moving on to Williams again, making some news as always. George was having a solid race, but unfortunately had a problem. Had to retire the car. I don't think that's obviously hurt his chances for next year, as he's got his seat that he needs. But George has been really solid this year. I think doing Williams a wonderful job. So things like this happen.
Right, and he was holding came up. So I mean, I think the car just didn't have the pace. He was really trying to hold on to P11, P12 for as long as he could. But yeah, as we know, had to retire. Moving on to Latifi, his teammates. It was always going to be tough starting from the pit lane after that bad crash in Q2. But he did have a very, very nice move, which was finally put on TV. A back marker move around the outside of turn 1. Latifi really put a nice move on Mazepin, and I think we have to give him some credit for that, although obviously struggled for the rest of the race.
And we spoke about Yuki already. A bit of a disaster weekend, another DNF. He's got to get it rolling. I really do hope that he will. And then I think last but not least, we have some angry people at Haas.
some angry Mazepin on our hands.
Yeah, some angry Mazepin.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So just to explain a little bit of background in Formula One, every weekend in qualifying, well, for most teams, one driver for their laps, they swap who goes first. And this weekend was Nikita Mazepin's turn to go first, and his teammate Mick Schumacher overtook him.
Yeah.
And Nikita got very, very upset.
Furious.
Rightfully so. Furious. Although Mick said that he did get approval from the team to do this.
That's correct.
Nikita just wasn't told. So Nikita has now said that he's very upset, very, very upset with Mick. And in one of the first laps of the race, Mick went for an overtake on him, and Nikita just absolutely shut the door. And in my opinion, this is absolutely not what a team like this needs right now. They're struggling. Yeah. They're really at the bottom of their F1 journey so far, and you can't.
For sure, it's undoubtedly the worst. Undoubtedly the worst Haas has ever been.
Right, and you can't have them arguing like this. So, I hope for the team's sake that they come back together and stronger and start working more as a team.
All right, moving on. I think those were two. Definitely, I shouldn't say two. It was one event, I guess, up and down weird weekend, and then followed by what was really an awesome weekend in Zandvoort. Moving on though, let's roll through the drivers and constructors championships. As we mentioned, some important shuffles happening there.
Right. So we have Max Verstappen P1 with 224.5 points from his.
Yeah, that 0.5 is going to drive everyone nuts the rest of the season.
Yeah, and then we have Lewis P2 on 221.5, Valtteri P3, followed by Lando in fourth. Now he dropped down one position.
It's still impressive that Lando's held up that fourth.
Yeah, no doubt. 100% still impressive. We'll see if he can maybe get back that third with a nice result next week at Monza, but I honestly doubt it. Sergio P5, Charles and Carlos P6 and 7, followed by Gasly, Ricardo, and Fernando Alonso, rounding up the top 10 with 46 points.
Yeah.
Ocon right behind him with 44. I mean, that Alpine pairing is definitely a strong one, and we'll see how they move on next year. Sebastian Vettel P12 with 35 points, followed by Yuki, far behind his teammate in P13, followed by Lance. George Russell P15 with 13 points, and Latifi with 7 points for Williams. Always nice to see them moving up the order. Kimi Räikkönen P17, followed by Giovinazzi P18, Schumacher, Mazepin, and now I guess we have to say Kubica is P21.
Yeah, that's true. And we spoke about Lance before, but it is tough to see. What did you say there? He's P15 in the championship. That's pretty low for a guy who was in a car that was arguably top 3 on the grid last year. So let's see what happens there the rest of the season. I'm sure they're working on making a lot of improvements there.
I'm sure they are. And on to the constructors. So we have Mercedes still on top by 12 points, 344.5.
An ever decreasing gap. We'll see what if Sergio can get in some podiums or some solid point finishes, and Max keeps winning races, I wouldn't be shocked to see that flip by the end of the year.
Absolutely. So Red Bull P2 with 332.5 points, followed by Ferrari, now 11.5 points ahead of McLaren, followed by Alpine in P5. Alpine will really want to keep a hold on that P5 for the rest of the season. Followed by AlphaTauri in P6. Gasly's really, really pushing Alpine to the limit, I think, with his AlphaTauri, trying to get P5 in the championship. I think that whole AlphaTauri team would absolutely love that. And I honestly think
they'd kill for that.
They deserve some great results in the championship. As we mentioned earlier, and I've talked a lot about Aston Martin struggling in P7. Yeah, that's followed by Williams with 20 points in P8, which I think is quite solid for them. They're going to want to keep that P8 for the rest of the season. Alfa Romeo P9 with 3 points, and Haas obviously with 0 points this season, down in P10.
And I know we spoke about some of the announcements earlier, but definitely a lot going on in the driver market recently. I'd say the biggest one is this morning that George Russell announced that he will be driving at Mercedes for 2022. News coming off yesterday where Mercedes announced that they, I guess you can say released Valtteri Bottas and that he'll be taking one of the seats at Alfa Romeo, which of course came off the news that Kimi Räikkönen was retiring from Formula One after the end of 2021, liberating a seat at Alfa Romeo. Other than that, there is some still news to come. I think it's worth actually running through that 2022 lineup. At Mercedes, we have Lewis Hamilton as of now, who does have a contract till 2023. He did say that the pandemic and COVID has made him question how long he'd stay in Formula One. Of course, he's under contract, so I don't see anything happening there. He'll be partnering up with George Russell, or I should say driving alongside George Russell. Red Bull, we have Max Verstappen, who's obviously staying, with Sergio Perez, who announced that he'll be staying at Red Bull. We have Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo at McLaren, no changes there. Sebastian Vettel and Lance Stroll, who we assume are on multi-year deals at Aston Martin, who will be staying. Esteban Ocon and Fernando Alonso at Alpine, no changes there. Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz at Ferrari, again, no changes there. Pierre Gasly, Yuki Tsunoda, staying at AlphaTauri. They've both shown, I shouldn't say they've both, Yuki is talented. Pierre has obviously done an incredible job. Some people say he should have been even, more rewarded, maybe bumped up somewhere on the grid. But they'll be there for 2022. Then at Alfa Romeo, we have Valtteri Bottas, and what is now being held as an open seat because there is no confirmation yet that Antonio Giovinazzi will be back at Alfa Romeo. There's a lot of guys we can see jump in there. At Haas, Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher, we assume on multi-year deals will be back. And then at Williams, we have 2 question marks. Nicholas Latifi, I think, is on a year-to-year basis, so no confirmation there. And then that second seat is definitely, or maybe it's the first seat, who knows, up for grabs. Will we see Callum Ilott? Will we see Alex Albon? Will we see Nick DeVries? Who knows?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I think Latifi's pretty locked in there at Williams, but that second Williams seat can be pretty exciting. Might see an Alex Albon jump in there, which would be nice to see him.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Christian Horner and Toto Wolff went back and forth this weekend saying, empty seat here, empty seat there. Would we let our Mercedes driver drive for a Red Bull car, vice versa? Right. So I'm sure in the next week or two, there'll be a lot of news coming out there.
Exactly. Should be quite an exciting end to the F1 silly season in 2021.
And as ever, thanks so much for watching. And we will be back next week.
Make sure to like and subscribe. See you guys later. Thank you.
Thank you.